Tell me this is real. Tell me you won't let me go.
You are my forever, Leora.
Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story. The words echoed through Ethan Caldwell's penthouse at 3 o'clock in the morning, a ghost of memory that had haunted him for 3 years. Sophia Hart's voice, soft and trusting, spoken on their wedding night as she lay naked in his arms, vulnerable and radiant with happiness. He'd kissed her forehead then, tasting salt from her tears of joy, and whispered back, "Forever, what a liar he'd been." The crystal tumbler exploded against the marble wall, 40 floors above Manhattan. Amber whiskey painted abstract patterns of destruction across priceless white stone. Ethan stared at the mess with empty eyes, his chest heaving from the violence of the throw. Even his rage felt hollow now, another expensive emotion in a life built on beautiful, meaningless things. At 35, he owned everything money could buy. His penthouse overlooked Central Park like a throne room, filled with art that museums coveted and furniture that belonged in magazines. His garage housed cars worth more than most people's homes. His closets contained suits tailored by masters who dressed kings and presidents. None of it meant anything without her. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. That's how long it had been since Sophia Hart walked out of his life, taking every ounce of genuine love he'd ever known with her. He knew the exact count, because every morning he woke up and marked another day in hell, another 24 hours of punishment for destroying the only pure thing that had ever been his. The silence in the penthouse was deafening. No humming from the kitchen where Sophia used to make Sunday pancakes, dancing in one of his shirts that hung to her thighs. No gentle laughter from the bedroom where she'd read him poetry that he'd pretended to find boring. No whispered, "I love you" in the dark when she thought he was sleeping. Just silence, just emptiness, just the echo of his own stupidity reverberating off walls that had once contained paradise. His phone lay dark on the counter, its black screen mocking him. There had been a time when it buzzed constantly with Sophia's messages, photos of books she thought he'd enjoy, funny stories from the library, little hearts and inside jokes that made him smile despite himself. She'd believed he was worth loving, worth those small daily celebrations of connection. How wrong she'd been. The woman he'd married had been everything beautiful about the world, wrapped in soft curves and gentle kindness. Sophia saw magic in ordinary moments, found wonder in simple pleasures, loved with a depth that had terrified him in its completeness. She'd make up stories about strangers in grocery stores, talk to her houseplants like old friends, cry during commercials about rescued animals. Systematically tried to kill every bit of joy in her. God, the things he'd said, the casual cruelty disguised as concern. "Maybe you should try that new gym downtown. This dress might be more flattering, in a larger size. Do you really need dessert?" Each comment was a small knife, cutting away pieces of her confidence until the vibrant woman he'd married became a shadow, desperate to please him and failing because he'd made approval impossible. The end had come over dinner at Le Bernardin, their 2nd anniversary, the restaurant where he'd proposed, where she'd cried happy tears and said yes through laughter. 2 years later, in the same booth, he'd suggested plastic surgery between courses of perfectly prepared fish. "I know this amazing surgeon," he'd said, cutting his halibut with surgical precision. "He could do wonders for your proportions, maybe a tummy tuck, some liposuction. I'd pay for everything, of course." Sophia had gone completely still, her fork halfway to her mouth, her dark eyes wide with something that looked like death. For a long moment, she just stared at him across the candlelit table, while his words settled between them like poison. "Is that really what you think of me?" she'd whispered finally, after 2 years of marriage. "That's how you see me?" He tried to backtrack, to claim he wanted her to be happy, to feel confident, but it was too late. Something fundamental had shattered in that moment, and no amount of expensive gifts or hollow apologies could put it back together. The divorce papers had arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a courier who'd looked embarrassed to be there. Sophia hadn't asked for alimony, hadn't fought for half his assets, hadn't even wanted the jewelry he'd bought her. She'd simply wanted out, wanted to escape the prison of his expectations and find herself again. "I can't keep trying to be someone I'm not," she told him the last time they'd spoken, standing in the doorway of what had been their bedroom. Her suitcases were packed, her face pale but determined. "It's killing me, Ethan. This marriage is killing who I really am. He'd let her go. Actually, that was a lie. He'd practically pushed her out the door. Too proud to admit he was wrong. Too shallow to understand what he was losing. He'd convinced himself he was better off without her, that he could find someone more suitable, someone who fit his lifestyle without needing to be fixed. The first year after the divorce, he'd thrown himself into proving that point. Models, socialites, actresses, women who looked perfect on his arm and left him feeling emptier than ever. They laughed at his jokes because of his bank account, complimented his intelligence because of his success, shared his bed because of his status. None of them saw him, really saw him, the way Sophia had. None of them loved him for the broken, selfish man he actually was. The second year had been worse. The loneliness started eating at him like cancer, making him realize that all his wealth and success meant nothing without someone real to share it with. He'd started having dreams about Sophia, not just sexual fantasies, though those came too, but dreams where she was simply there, reading beside him on Sunday mornings, stealing bites of his dinner, falling asleep with her head on his chest while they watched terrible movies. In his dreams, he was still worthy of her love. The third year had brought a different kind of torture. Understanding, clarity arrived like a slow poison, showing him exactly what he'd had and exactly what he'd thrown away. Sophia's softness hadn't been weakness. It had been strength. Her kindness hadn't been naivety. It had been wisdom. Her love hadn't been blind. It had been the only thing in his life that had ever been real, and he tried to surgically remove it from her body because it didn't match his shallow definition of perfection. Now he stood in his mausoleum of success, surrounded by everything he'd thought he wanted, choking on the ashes of the only thing that had ever mattered. The penthouse felt like a tomb, beautiful, expensive, and utterly lifeless. He'd achieved every goal his parents had set for him, accumulated every status symbol his world valued, become exactly the kind of man his mother had always said women should want. But the only woman he'd ever actually wanted was gone. Ethan walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city that had once seemed like his kingdom. Millions of lights twinkled below, each one representing lives being lived, love being shared, connections being made and treasured. Somewhere out there, Sophia was building a new life, hopefully finding the happiness he'd been too stupid to give her. The thought of another man holding her, kissing her, appreciating her the way he should have sent agony shooting through his chest. But what right did he have to jealousy? He'd had a goddess and treated her like she was ordinary. He'd had pure love and poisoned it with his insecurities and shallow priorities. Some mistakes were too big to fix. Some hearts, once broken, stayed shattered. Some chances, once lost, never came again. As the clock struck 4 o'clock a.m., Ethan made a silent promise to the empty room, to the sleeping city, to Sophia, wherever she was. If by some miracle he ever got another chance, which he knew he didn't deserve, he would be different. He would love her the way she deserved to be loved from the beginning. He would celebrate her exactly as she was. He would spend every day making up for the pain he'd caused. But chances like that didn't exist in the real world. They were fairy tale nonsense, the kind of romantic fiction Sophia used to read while he'd criticized her for wasting time on silly stories. All he could do was carry his regret and hope that somewhere, somehow, Sophia had found a man smart enough to see her worth, strong enough to protect her heart, and wise enough to never, ever try to change a single thing about her. The broken glass remained scattered across the marble floor as Ethan finally collapsed into his chair, the same leather armchair where Sophia used to curl up in his lap during movies. She'd always stolen his popcorn, claiming hers didn't taste as good, and he'd pretend to be annoyed, while secretly loving how she'd snuggle closer when he threatened to withhold the bowl. God, what he wouldn't give for one more movie night, one more stolen kernel of popcorn, one more chance to hold her close and whisper the words he'd been too proud to say when they mattered. I love you exactly as you are. But it was too late for truth, too late for redemption, too late for everything except the slow, exquisite torture of remembering what love had felt like when he'd been too blind to see it. In his dreams that night, Sophia was still there, still soft and warm and forgiving, still looking at him like he was worth saving. But when morning came, reality returned with the brutal efficiency of a blade. She was gone. He was alone. And somewhere in the city that had once been their playground, the only woman he'd ever truly loved was building a life that had no room for the man who'd broken her heart. The punishment fit the crime perfectly. Ethan Caldwell had everything money could buy, and absolutely nothing that mattered. Chapter 2. The Goddess Returns. The invitation to the Children's Literacy Foundation Gala had been sitting on Ethan's desk for weeks, forgotten among quarterly reports and investment proposals. He'd almost thrown it away. Charity events held no appeal anymore, just reminders of how hollow his social life had become. But his assistant had insisted, claiming it would be good for his public image, and Ethan found himself in his black Armani tuxedo on a crisp October evening. Walking into the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Grand Ballroom, the event was everything he'd grown to despise about high society. Artificial conversations, air kisses from women who barely knew his name, and champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's weekly salary. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across marble floors where New York's elite mingled, their laughter echoing off ancient artifacts. Ethan nursed a whiskey and watched from the sidelines, already planning his early escape. Ethan Caldwell, darling, where have you been hiding? Amelia Worthington materialized beside him in a cloud of expensive perfume and surgical enhancements. Her smile was as artificial as everything else about her, the kind of woman his mother had always pushed him toward. You simply must meet my niece. She just graduated from Yale, and she's absolutely divine. Ethan was formulating a polite excuse when the ballroom's chatter suddenly dimmed, as if someone had turned down the volume on the entire room. Heads turned toward the entrance. Conversations paused mid-sentence, and even the waitstaff stopped to stare. Following their collective gaze, Ethan looked toward the grand staircase and felt his world tilt completely off its axis. Sophia. But not the Sophia he remembered. This woman descending the marble steps was a vision of complete transformation that made Ethan's breath catch in his throat. Gone was the soft, uncertain woman he'd divorced 3 years ago. In her place stood a figure of absolute elegance that made every other woman in the room pale in comparison. Her metamorphosis was stunning. She'd lost weight, but not in the unhealthy, desperate way she'd tried during their marriage. This was confident, radiant wellness, her figure now a perfect hourglass that the elegant emerald gown showcased beautifully. The dress hugged every curve, the silk fabric catching the light as she moved with newfound grace. Her dark hair, once styled conservatively, now fell in luxurious waves past her shoulders, framing a face that glowed with self-assurance. But it was more than the physical changes that left him speechless. Sophia moved differently now, with purpose, with self-assurance, with the kind of magnetic presence that commanded attention. Her smile was radiant as she greeted people, her laugh carrying across the ballroom like music. She wore confidence like the finest jewelry. "My God," breathed Amelia beside him. "Who is that stunning creature?" Ethan couldn't answer. His heart was hammering against his ribs, so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. This was Sophia, his Sophia, but transformed into something beyond his wildest dreams or most tormented fantasies. She was everything he'd ever imagined she could be, everything he'd stupidly tried to force her to become. But she'd done it for herself, without him, after him. And she wasn't alone. A man approached her at the bottom of the stairs, tall, lean, with dark hair and an easy smile. He was handsome in an artistic way, wearing his tuxedo with casual elegance, and when he offered Sophia his arm, she took it with a warm smile that sent a knife of jealousy straight through Ethan's chest. Javier Moral. Ethan recognized him vaguely from the art world, a successful painter whose work graced galleries across the city. He was exactly the kind of man Sophia deserved, creative, passionate, someone who would see her as art rather than a project to be improved. As they moved through the crowd, Javier's hand resting possessively on the small of Sophia's back, people literally turned to watch them pass. She commanded attention effortlessly now, her presence filling the room in a way that made Ethan's chest ache with pride and loss in equal measure. This was the woman he'd failed to see, the goddess he'd been too blind to appreciate. Ethan found himself moving through the crowd without conscious thought, drawn to her like a moth to flame. His hands shook as he approached, his carefully practiced confidence deserting him completely. What would he say? How could he possibly explain 3 years of regret in a few words? Sophia, the sound of her name on his lips made her turn, and for just a moment, Barely a heartbeat, something flickered in her dark eyes. Recognition, surprise, and something else he couldn't quite identify. But then her expression shifted, becoming politely blank, as if she were looking at a stranger. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice honey-smooth and completely controlled. "Do I know you?" The words hit him like a physical blow. She was looking directly at him with those beautiful dark eyes he'd dreamed about for 3 years, and there wasn't a trace of recognition in them. Not anger, not hurt, not even acknowledgement of their shared past, just polite confusion, as if he were any other stranger trying to make conversation at a social event. Javier stepped slightly closer to Sofia, his arm sliding protectively around her waist. "Is everything all right, mi amor?" His accent added warmth to the endearment, and Sofia leaned into his touch naturally. "Fine," she said, still looking at Ethan with that devastating blankness. "This gentleman seems to think we've met before." "Sofia, it's me, Ethan." Ethan Caldwell. His voice cracked slightly on his own name, desperation bleeding through his usual composure. She tilted her head slightly, as if considering this information, then shook her head with a small, apologetic smile. "I'm afraid I don't recall. Though I suppose I meet so many people through my work." Her gaze moved past him dismissively. "If you'll excuse us, Javier and I were just heading to dinner." They turned to leave, and panic seized Ethan's throat. "Sofia, please. We were married. We were married for 2 years." She paused, turning back with what might have been mild curiosity. "I think you have me confused with someone else, Mr. Caldwell." Ethan Caldwell. He felt like he was drowning. "Well, Mr. Caldwell, I can assure you, I would remember being married. That's not something one forgets." Her smile was perfectly polite and absolutely crushing. "Enjoy your evening." And then she was walking away, Javier's hand on her back, her emerald dress flowing behind her like water. Ethan stood frozen in the middle of the ballroom, watching the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, the woman who had been his wife, who had loved him unconditionally, who had begged him to see her worth disappear into the crowd, as if he didn't exist. "Brutal," murmured someone behind him, and Ethan realized he'd become a spectacle. People were watching, whispering, probably already spreading gossip about his very public rejection, but he couldn't bring himself to care about his social standing or wounded pride. All he could think about was Sofia, how stunning she looked, how confident she'd become, how completely she'd transformed herself into everything he'd once foolishly thought he wanted, and how she'd looked right through him, as if their love, their marriage, their shared pain meant nothing at all. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Ethan moved through the motions of social interaction, but his eyes constantly searched for emerald silk and dark hair. He caught glimpses of Sofia throughout the night, laughing with Javier, charming donors, commanding attention wherever she went. She was magnificent, untouchable, completely out of his reach. When the evening finally ended, Ethan sat in his Bentley outside the museum, watching as Sofia and Javier emerged together. Javier helped her into a taxi with the careful attention of a man smitten. And as the cab pulled away, Ethan caught one last glimpse of Sofia's profile in the window. She was everything he'd lost, everything he'd thrown away, everything he'd never deserved in the first place. And now she was someone else's goddess, someone else's miracle, someone else's dream come true. The drive home passed in silence, his mind replaying every second of their encounter. Sofia's transformation was complete. She'd become the woman he'd always wanted her to be, but she'd done it without him, after him, despite him, and she'd made it clear that as far as she was concerned, he no longer existed. Chapter 3. Fire and Ice. Sleep became a stranger to Ethan Caldwell. For 3 weeks after the gala, he lay awake every night, replaying those devastating moments when Sofia had looked through him like he was invisible. Her transformation haunted him, the way she'd moved with such confidence, how every eye in the room had followed her, the complete dismissal she'd given him. By day, he tried to function normally, attending board meetings and managing his investments, but his mind was consumed with one thought: he had to see her again. The private investigator's report arrived on a gray November morning, and Ethan's hands trembled as he opened the manila envelope. Sofia Hart now worked as a literacy coordinator at the Brooklyn Heights Community Center, having earned her master's degree in library science after their divorce. She lived alone in a brownstone apartment in Park Slope, spent her weekends at art galleries and poetry readings. And yes, she was dating Javier Morales, though they didn't live together. The knowledge that she was so close, just across the bridge, made his obsession worse. He found himself driving through Brooklyn at odd hours, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. He sent flowers to the library with unsigned cards, left expensive bottles of wine at her doorstep, even had her favorite coffee delivered to her workplace every morning. All of it went unacknowledged, as if his gestures were absorbed into a void. Then he discovered her schedule. Sophia left the community center every Tuesday and Thursday at exactly 5:30 p.m. to walking to her car, parked in the small lot behind the building. The information felt like a lifeline, and Ethan found himself waiting in the shadows of that parking lot on a cold Tuesday evening in late November, his heart pounding as he watched her emerge from the staff entrance. She was even more beautiful than he remembered from the gala. She wore a cream-colored wool coat that hugged her curves, her dark hair flowing loose around her shoulders, her face glowing with the kind of contentment he'd never seen during their marriage. She moved with purpose, keys in hand, her heels clicking against the asphalt. Sophia. She froze at the sound of her name, her hand reaching for her car door handle. Slowly, she turned, and when she saw him standing 10 feet away, her expression shifted from surprise to something much colder. "You've got to be kidding me," she said, her voice carrying an edge he'd never heard before. "Are you following me now? I just want to talk to you." Ethan stepped closer, and she immediately stepped back against her car. "Please, just 5 minutes. There's nothing to talk about." Sophia's grip tightened on her keys, her knuckles white. "I thought I made it clear at the gala that I don't know you. That was cruel, even for you." The words escaped before he could stop them, and Sophia's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "Cruel? You want to talk about cruel?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's rich coming from you, Ethan." So, she did remember him. The realization sent relief flooding through his chest, followed immediately by hope. If she remembered, if she was angry, that meant she still felt something. Indifference would have been worse than hatred. "I know I hurt you," he began, taking another step closer. "I know I was an idiot, and I'm sorry." "Stop." Sophia held up a hand, but Ethan could see her chest rising and falling rapidly. "Just stop talking." But he couldn't stop. 3 years of regret came pouring out as he moved closer, backing her against the car door. "I think about you every day. Every single day, Sophia. I dream about you." "You think about me?" Her voice rose, echoing off the brick walls of the surrounding buildings. "You think about me? That's supposed to make me feel better about the way you destroyed me?" The pain in her voice hit him like a physical blow, but he pressed on, desperate to make her understand. "I was wrong about everything. I see that now. You're perfect. You always were perfect, and I was too stupid to see it." "Perfect." Sophia's laugh was bitter. "Now I'm perfect. After I spent 2 years trying to become what you wanted, now that I've done it for myself, suddenly I'm perfect." She was right against the car now, trapped between the cold metal and his body, and Ethan could smell her perfume, something new, sophisticated, intoxicating. He placed his hands on either side of her, palms flat against the car door, not quite touching her, but close enough to feel the heat radiating from her skin. "Sophia, please," he whispered, his face inches from hers. "Just let me explain." For a moment, the anger in her eyes flickered, replaced by something that looked almost like longing. Her breath caught, and Ethan felt the familiar electricity that had always existed between them. She was so beautiful, so close. And he remembered exactly how it felt to hold her, to kiss those soft lips, to feel her melt against him. "Explain what?" she whispered back, and her voice was breathier now, less controlled. "Explain how you made me feel like I wasn't good enough? Explain how you criticized everything about me until I stopped looking in mirrors?" "I was an ass," he said, leaning even closer. The space between them was charged with tension, and he could see her pulse racing at the base of her throat. "I was shallow and stupid, and I didn't deserve you. But I've changed, Sophia. I'm not the same man." "People don't change, Ethan." but her voice was weaker now, and her eyes had dropped to his mouth. Not really. Then why are you breathing so fast? He moved his right hand from the car to her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. Why is your heart racing? Sophia's eyes fluttered closed at his touch, and for a moment she leaned into his palm. The gesture was so familiar, so achingly tender, that Ethan felt his own heart stop. This was his Sophia, the woman who used to curl up in his arms, who used to look at him like he hung the moon. But then her eyes snapped open, filled with fury, and something that looked like betrayal, not at him, but at herself, for responding to his touch. Don't. She grabbed his wrist and pulled his hand away from her face. Don't you dare think you can just walk back into my life and make me feel things again. You do feel something, he said, pressing his advantage. I can see it in your eyes. You're not as indifferent as you pretend to be. Indifferent? Sophia's laugh was sharp. I was never indifferent to you, Ethan. That was the problem. You wanted me to be less than you, grateful for whatever attention you gave me. That's not true, is it? She pushed against his chest, but he didn't move back. You were embarrassed by me. You cringed every time I walked into a room at your precious social events. You made suggestions about gyms and diets and plastic surgeons because you couldn't stand the thought of people knowing you'd married someone who wasn't magazine perfect. Every word was true, and they cut deeper because of it. I was wrong, he said desperately. I was an idiot, but I've learned. Have you? Sophia's eyes blazed as she looked up at him. Or are you just saying that because now I look the way you always wanted me to look? Now that I've transformed into your ideal woman, suddenly you want me back. The question hung in the cold air between them, and Ethan felt something crumble inside his chest. Because wasn't that exactly what had happened? Hadn't he seen her at the gala, seen her transformation, and immediately wanted her back? How was that any different from what he'd done before? It's not about how you look, he said. But even to his own ears, the protest sounded weak. Isn't it? Sophia smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Tell me honestly, Ethan, if I still looked the way I did when we were married, would you be here right now? Would you be pressing me up against this car, telling me how perfect I am? The silence stretched between them, and in that silence, Sophia found her answer. That's what I thought. She pushed past him, moving toward the driver's side of her car. Stay away from me, Ethan. I mean it. I'm not the same broken woman you divorced. I won't let you destroy me again. Sophia, wait. But she was already in her car, the engine starting with a roar. Through the windshield, he could see tears streaming down her face, and the sight made his chest ache with regret and self-loathing. As she drove away, leaving him standing alone in the empty parking lot, Ethan realized the truth of what she'd said. He had wanted her back because of how she looked now, because she'd become everything he'd once tried to force her to be. But somewhere in the pain and longing of the last few minutes, something else had awakened. The way she'd felt in his arms, the way her breath had caught when he touched her face, the way she'd looked at him with such hurt and fury that wasn't about her appearance. That was about them, about the connection that had never really died. The question was whether Sophia would ever believe that, or whether he could prove it, not just to her, but to himself. Chapter 4. Playing with Fire. Sophia Hart stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror of her Brooklyn apartment, her hands gripping the marble countertop so tightly her knuckles had gone white. 3 days had passed since the parking lot encounter with Ethan, and she still couldn't shake the memory of how her body had betrayed her. The way her heart had raced when he'd pressed close to her, the way her breath had caught when his thumb traced her cheekbone, the way every nerve ending had come alive at his proximity. It infuriated her. She'd spent 3 years building walls around her heart, transforming herself from the broken woman who'd left his penthouse into someone strong, confident, untouchable. And in 5 minutes, he'd nearly torn all of that down, with nothing but his presence and that familiar, desperate look in his eyes. No, she whispered to her reflection, not again. But as she applied her lipstick, a bold red that made her feel powerful, a different kind of resolve settled in her chest. If Ethan Caldwell thought he could waltz back into her life and make her melt with a few pretty words and heated glances, he was about to learn how wrong he was. She wasn't the same pushover he'd divorced. She was a woman who knew her worth now, who understood the power she wielded, and if he wanted to play games, she'd show him exactly what he'd lost. The plan began to form that evening when Javier called with an invitation to a gallery opening in Soho. Her best friend since art school, Javier had been her anchor through the darkest days after the divorce, helping her rediscover her strength and confidence. He was gay, gorgeous, and utterly devoted to making her happy, the perfect companion for what she had in mind. "Javier, darling," she purred into the phone, already feeling more like herself. "How would you feel about helping me make my ex-husband absolutely miserable?" His delighted laughter filled her apartment. "Mi amor, you know I live for drama. Tell me everything." The gallery opening was exactly the kind of event where New York's cultural elite mingled, the perfect hunting ground. Sophia chose her outfit carefully, a form-fitting black dress that hugged every curve, stiletto heels that made her legs look endless, and hair styled in loose waves that caught the light as she moved. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a woman who could bring any man to his knees. Javier picked her up in his vintage Porsche, looking devastatingly handsome in a perfectly tailored suit. "You look like a goddess," he said, kissing her cheek. "Your ex-husband is going to lose his mind." "That's the idea," Sophia replied, settling back in the leather seat with a satisfied smile. The gallery was packed with Manhattan's art crowd, champagne flowing freely as people admired the bold abstract paintings covering the white walls. Sophia made her entrance slowly, deliberately, letting every eye in the room find her. She moved through the crowd like she owned it, Javier's hand resting possessively on the small of her back, playing the part of the devoted boyfriend to perfection. She felt Ethan's presence before she saw him, that familiar tingle at the base of her neck, the awareness that had always existed between them, telling her he was watching. When she finally spotted him across the room, nursing a whiskey and staring at her with naked longing, satisfaction curled warm in her chest. "There's my target," she murmured to Javier, who glanced over and whistled low. "Dios mío. He looks like he wants to devour you. This is going to be too easy." Sophia smiled, the expression sharp as a blade. "Watch and learn, baby." She began her performance then, becoming the picture of a woman completely devoted to her companion. She laughed at Javier's jokes with genuine delight, her hand resting on his chest as she leaned close to whisper in his ear. When he spun her around to admire a striking painting, she melted against him, her head falling back against his shoulder as if she belonged there. All the while, she was acutely aware of Ethan's gaze from across the room. She could feel his jealousy like heat, could sense his frustration. Good. Let him see what he'd thrown away. Let him burn with wanting something beyond his reach. "You're evil," Javier murmured against her hair, playing his part beautifully. "The poor man looks like he's about to spontaneously combust." "He deserves worse," Sophia replied. But she couldn't keep the breathiness from her voice. The intensity of Ethan's stare was affecting her more than she wanted to admit, sending heat coursing through her veins despite her determination to remain cold. The game escalated when a mutual acquaintance approached them. Eleanor Prescott, a society matron who'd known Sophia during her marriage to Ethan. The woman's eyes lit up with gossip-hungry delight as she took in Sophia's transformation. "Sophia Hart, my dear, you look absolutely radiant." "And who is this handsome man?" "Javier Morales," Sophia said, her voice warm with affection as she introduced her boyfriend. "This is Eleanor Prescott. She knew me in my previous life." Eleanor's eyebrows shot up at the subtle dig, and Sophia could see her filing away every detail for later dissection at lunch with her society friends. "Perfect. Let the gossip mills churn. Let everyone know that Sophia Hart had moved on to bigger and better things." "Javier is an artist," Sophia continued, gazing up at him with adoring eyes. "His work is featured in galleries across Europe. I'm so proud of him." Javier played along beautifully, pressing a kiss to Sophia's temple that made several women nearby sigh with envy. "And I'm the luckiest man alive," he said, his accent adding warmth to the words. Sophia felt more than saw Ethan approach their little group, his presence like electricity in the air. When she turned to acknowledge him, she made sure her expression was politely distant, as if he were just another stranger seeking introductions. "Eleanor," Ethan said stiffly, his eyes never leaving Sophia's face. "Ethan, how lovely to see you." Eleanor was practically vibrating with excitement at the social drama unfolding before her. "Have you met Sophia's boyfriend, Javier?" The word boyfriend hit Ethan like a physical blow. Sophia could see it in the way his jaw tightened, in the way his hands clenched at his sides. But he managed to extend his hand to Javier with forced civility. "Javier Morales," Javier said smoothly, his handshake firm and confident. "And you are Ethan Caldwell." The name came out rough, and Sophia had to suppress a smile at how obviously rattled he was. "Ah, the ex-husband," Javier said with just enough edge to make it clear he knew exactly who Ethan was. "Sophia has told me so much about you." The implication hung in the air that Sophia had been discussing their marriage with her new man, sharing intimate details of their relationship. Sophia saw Ethan's face darken with jealousy and humiliation, and she felt a surge of vindictive satisfaction. "All good things, I hope," Ethan managed, his voice strained. Sophia tilted her head as if considering the question seriously. "I don't really talk about the past much," she said finally. "I prefer to focus on the present and the future." She smiled up at Javier, who was watching the entire exchange with barely concealed amusement. "Very wise," Eleanor interjected, clearly sensing the tension. "Well, I should let you young people enjoy the evening. Sophia, you look simply divine. Happiness suits you." As Eleanor bustled away, the three of them stood in awkward silence. Sophia could feel Ethan's desperation radiating off him in waves, could see him struggling to find something to say that might bridge the chasm between them. "Sophia," he finally said, his voice low and urgent, "could I speak with you privately for a moment?" "I don't think that's necessary," Javier interjected smoothly, his arm tightening around Sophia's waist. "My girlfriend and I were just about to get some air." The possessive gesture and the emphasis on "my girlfriend" made Ethan's eyes flash with something dangerous. For a moment, Sophia thought he might actually start a fight right there in the gallery, and the thought sent an unexpected thrill through her. "It's fine, Javier," she said, placing a calming hand on his chest. "Mr. Caldwell and I have nothing to discuss anyway." The dismissal was calculated and cruel, and Sophia saw it land like a slap across Ethan's face. His eyes met hers for one burning moment, and she saw everything there: his longing, his regret, his desperate need for her forgiveness. Part of her wanted to reach out to him, to ease the pain she could see etched in every line of his face. But then she remembered how it felt to be criticized and belittled, to have her confidence slowly eroded until she barely recognized herself in the mirror. She remembered the night he'd suggested plastic surgery, the way he'd looked at her like she was a problem to be solved rather than a woman to be loved. "Enjoy your evening, Ethan," she said coolly, then turned away, dismissing him completely. As she and Javier walked away, Sophia felt Ethan's eyes burning into her back. The game was working exactly as she'd planned. He was suffering, burning with want for something he couldn't have, finally understanding what it felt like to be deemed unworthy. But as they stepped out into the cool night air, Sophia realized something she hadn't expected. Playing with fire was dangerous for everyone involved. Because despite her careful plans and protective walls, seeing Ethan's pain didn't bring her the satisfaction she'd hoped for. Instead, it made her remember that once upon a time, she'd loved him enough to break her own heart, trying to please him. Chapter 5. The Heart Remembers. 2 weeks after the gallery opening, Ethan found himself doing something he hadn't done in years: volunteering. The Brooklyn Community Center was a far cry from the polished charity galas he usually attended, with its worn linoleum floors, flickering fluorescent lights, and the smell of coffee that had been brewing too long, but it was where Sophia taught adult literacy classes every Tuesday and Thursday evening, and that made it the most important place in his world. He'd signed up using his middle name, Nathan, and claimed to be a recently unemployed accountant looking to give back to the community. The elderly volunteer coordinator, Mrs. Lynn, had been delighted to have another tutor, especially one willing to help with the evening classes for working adults. "These students are so dedicated," she'd explained, shuffling through paperwork with arthritic hands. "Many of them work 2 jobs just to make ends meet, but they still come here because they want better lives for their families." Ethan had nodded appropriately, but his mind was focused on one thing: being near Sophia again, even if she didn't know he was there. His first glimpse of her in her element stole his breath. She sat at a small table with Carmen Rivera, a 40-year-old house cleaner, learning to read so she could help her daughter with homework. Sophia's patience seemed infinite as she sounded out words, her face lighting up with genuine joy every time Carmen successfully completed a sentence. "That's beautiful, Carmen. You're getting so much better," Sophia said, her voice warm with encouragement. "Your daughter is going to be so proud." Carmen beamed under the praise, and Ethan felt something shift in his chest as he watched this interaction from across the room. This was Sophia's true calling, not the social events or charity galas where she'd struggled to fit in during their marriage, but this quiet, meaningful work where she could make a real difference in people's lives. She wore simple, clothes-dark jeans and a soft blue sweater that brought out her eyes. But she was more beautiful than any fashion model on a magazine cover. Her face glowed with purpose and compassion, and when she laughed at something one of her students said, the sound filled the room with warmth. This was the woman he'd fallen in love with all those years ago, before his shallow priorities had blinded him to her worth. This was the woman he'd destroyed with his criticism and impossible standards. "Nathan, right?" Ethan startled as Sophia suddenly appeared beside his table, where he'd been helping an elderly man named George work through a basic reading workbook. Up close, she was even more devastating. Her skin glowing with health, her dark eyes bright with intelligence and kindness. "Yes," he managed, hoping his voice sounded steadier than he felt. "Nathan, I'm Sophia, the program coordinator. Mrs. Lynn mentioned, you're new." Her smile was professional but warm, and Ethan felt his heart hammering against his ribs. "How are you finding it so far?" "Rewarding," he said honestly, looking down at George, who was concentrating on sounding out the word family. "These people are incredible." "They are." Sophia's expression softened as she watched George work. George here is 72 and decided he wanted to read the Bible from cover to cover before he passes. He's determined to do it himself, not have someone read it to him. George looked up with a grin that showed several missing teeth. "Miss Sophia here is an angel sent from heaven. Been teaching me for 6 months now, and I can already read 3 whole chapters of Genesis by myself." "George is one of our star students," Sophia said, ruffling his gray hair affectionately. The gesture was so tender that Ethan felt his throat tighten with emotion. This was who Sophia really was. Not the broken woman he'd criticized into submission, not even the confident goddess who'd dismissed him at the gallery. This was her true self, the person she became when she was helping others, when she felt valued and appreciated for her mind and heart, rather than her appearance. "Well, I'll let you get back to it," Sophia said, turning to go. "Nathan, if you need anything, just let me know." As she walked away, Ethan caught a hint of her perfume, something light and floral that made him think of spring mornings and new beginnings. He forced himself to focus on George's reading lesson, but part of his mind was completely consumed with Sophia's presence across the room. For the next month, Ethan became a regular at the community center. He threw himself into the work with surprising passion, discovering that helping people learn to read was more fulfilling than any business deal he'd ever closed. But mostly, he was there to watch Sophia, to study her like a man trying to memorize a work of art. She was brilliant at what she did, patient and encouraging with every student, regardless of their skill level. She celebrated small victories like they were Olympic gold medals. And when someone struggled, she found new ways to explain concepts until something clicked. Her students adored her, bringing her small gifts. Flowers from their gardens, homemade cookies, pictures drawn by their children. Ethan began to understand that this was Sophia's kingdom, her place of power and purpose. Here, she wasn't trying to fit into someone else's world. She was creating her own, building something meaningful and beautiful. It was during his 4th week of volunteering that everything changed. The evening had started normally, with Ethan helping his assigned students while stealing glances at Sophia across the room. But a winter storm had blown in unexpectedly. And by 8 o'clock, rain was lashing against the windows with fierce intensity. "Everyone, be careful getting home," Sophia called out as students began packing up their things. "The weather looks terrible out there." Most of the students left quickly, eager to get home before the storm worsened. Mrs. Lynn had already gone for the day, and Ethan found himself alone in the community center with Sophia as she locked up the building. "You don't have to wait," she said, not looking at him as she gathered papers from her desk. "I know how to lock up." "It's not safe for you to walk to your car alone in this weather," Ethan replied, hovering near the door. Sophia finally looked up at him, and for a moment, Something flickered in her dark eye. Surprise, maybe, or appreciation. "That's very thoughtful, Nathan. Thank you." They made it to the parking lot just as the storm reached its full fury. Rain came down in sheets, and the wind howled between the buildings with enough force to make them both stagger. Sophia's car was parked near the back of the lot, and by the time they reached it, they were both soaked to the skin. "Oh no," Sophia groaned, trying her key in the lock. It stuck. The lock gets temperamental when it's wet. Thunder crashed overhead, and lightning illuminated the parking lot in stark white flashes. Sophia's thin sweater was plastered to her body, and her hair hung in dark waves around her face. She looked vulnerable and beautiful and completely soaked, and Ethan felt something primal stir in his chest. "Here, let me try," he said, moving closer to take the keys from her hands. But as their fingers touched, Sophia looked up at him, and suddenly they were standing too close, sharing the same space, the same breath. The rain had washed away her carefully applied makeup, revealing the natural beauty he remembered from their quietest moments together. Her eyes were wide and dark, and he could see her pulse beating rapidly at the base of her throat. "Sophia," he whispered, forgetting everything except how desperately he'd missed her. For a moment, she didn't pull away. For a moment, she stood there in the rain, looking up at him like she used to, like he was someone worth loving. The years fell away, and they were just Ethan and Sophia again, two people who had once loved each other more than life itself. And then, before he could stop himself, before common sense could intervene, Ethan cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. Sophia went rigid with shock for half a second, and then she was kissing him back with a desperation that matched his own. Her arms went around his neck, her body pressed against his, and Ethan felt like he was drowning in the taste and feel of her. She was soft and warm and perfect, and kissing her felt like coming home after years of wandering in the wilderness. This was what he'd been missing, what he'd thrown away in his arrogance and stupidity, not just her beauty or her companionship, but this. The way she felt in his arms, the way she kissed him like she was pouring her soul into his, the way their bodies fit together like two pieces of the same puzzle. But then, as suddenly as it had begun, Sophia tore herself away from him. Her hand cracked across his cheek with enough force to make his ears ring, and when he looked at her, her face was a mask of fury and pain. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. "How dare you think you can just God? I hate you. I hate you for making me feel this again." There were tears streaming down her face, mixing with the rain, and Ethan realized with horror that he'd made her cry again, just like he always did. "Sophia, I'm sorry. I didn't mean." "Yes, you did." She was backing away from him, her car keys clutched in her shaking hands. "You meant every second of it, just like you mean all those flowers and gifts you think I don't know are from you." Ethan's stomach dropped. She knew. Of course she knew. "Stay away from me," Sophia said finally, getting her car door open. "I mean it, Ethan. Nathan, whoever you think you are now, stay away from me, or I'll get a restraining order." She slammed the car door and drove away into the storm, leaving Ethan standing alone in the empty parking lot with the taste of her kiss still on his lips and the sting of her slap burning on his cheek. But as he stood there in the rain, one thought echoed through his mind above all others. She had kissed him back. For those few precious seconds, Sophia had kissed him like she still loved him, and that gave him hope. Chapter 6. The Truth Unveiled. Sophia's hands shook as she poured herself a glass of wine. The events of the stormy night 3 days ago, still burning through her mind like wildfire. She'd kissed him back. Despite everything he'd put her through, despite all her walls and defenses, she'd melted in Ethan's arms, like she was still that naive woman who'd believed love could conquer all. The worst part wasn't the kiss itself. It was how right it had felt, how perfectly she'd fit against him, how her body had remembered every contour of his despite 3 years of trying to forget. She'd spent those years rebuilding herself, becoming stronger, more confident, untouchable, and in 30 seconds of rain and desperation, he'd nearly... She walked to her bedroom window, looking down at the street below, where couples strolled hand in hand in the evening light. Once, she and Ethan had walked these same streets, back when she'd believed their love could overcome anything, back when she'd thought his criticism came from caring, not cruelty. She remembered one particular evening when they'd walked through Brooklyn Heights, his arm around her waist, and she'd pointed out her favorite brownstone, with the climbing ivy and bright red door. "Someday," she'd said dreamily, "I want to live somewhere that feels like home." He'd barely glanced at the building, too busy checking his phone for stock prices. Her reflection stared back at her from the window. The woman she'd become was everything she'd dreamed of being during those dark months after their divorce. Strong, successful, beautiful. But looking at herself now, she felt a familiar ache in her chest, the same emptiness that had driven her to transform herself in the first place. Her phone buzzed with another text from Javier, her co-conspirator in the elaborate game they'd been playing with Ethan's emotions. But Sophia couldn't bring herself to read it. The game felt cruel now, petty in a way that made her stomach turn. Seeing the raw pain in Ethan's eyes after she'd slapped him had awakened something she'd thought was dead, her capacity for compassion where he was concerned. She moved to her dresser, opening the small jewelry box that held the only piece from her marriage she'd kept, not the expensive diamond earrings or the sapphire necklace he'd given her for their first anniversary, but a simple silver locket her grandmother had given her on her wedding day. Inside was a photo of her and Ethan from their honeymoon in Tuscany, both of them laughing at something he'd said, her eyes shining with pure happiness. Had that happiness been real? Or had she been so desperate for love that she'd imagined the connection between them? She traced the tiny photo with her fingertip, remembering that day. They'd gotten lost trying to find a restaurant Javier had recommended, and instead of being frustrated, Ethan had laughed and suggested they have a picnic with bread and wine from a local shop. For those few hours, he'd been the man she'd fallen in love with. Spontaneous, attentive, present. The doorbell rang, jolting her from her thoughts. Through the peephole, she saw a delivery man holding an enormous bouquet of white roses, her favorite flowers, though she'd never told Ethan that during their marriage, he'd always brought her red roses, assuming they were more romantic. The fact that he'd learned her preference now, after their divorce, felt like another small knife wound to her carefully guarded heart. She signed for the flowers mechanically, then read the card with trembling fingers. "I remember everything now. The way you hummed while cooking breakfast, how you cried during sad movies even when you tried to hide it, that you preferred white roses because you said they looked like hope, the way you always saved the best bite of dessert for last, how you talked to plants like they were old friends, how you made grocery shopping an adventure by trying to guess other people's stories. I'm sorry it took me so long to really see you. E." The card fluttered to the floor as Sophia sank onto her couch, the bouquet forgotten in her lap. He did remember all those little details about her that she'd thought he'd never noticed, that she'd assumed were invisible to him during their marriage. The humming, she'd stopped doing that when he'd made an offhand comment about it being annoying. The way she'd nurture her small garden of houseplants, giving each one a name and personality, he'd called it childish once. Her habit of creating elaborate backstories for strangers in the grocery stores, he'd tried to share that joy with him once, and he'd looked at her like she was crazy. How long had he been watching her, studying her, learning the things he should have known when they were together? The thought both thrilled and terrified her. Did this mean he'd cared more than he'd shown? Or was this just another manipulation, another way to make her believe he'd changed? She picked up the card again, reading his words more carefully. There was something different about his handwriting, less rushed than she remembered, more thoughtful. Even his choice of words felt different, more vulnerable, less calculated. A soft knock at her door made her freeze. She knew it was him before she even looked, could feel his presence like electricity in the air. Through the peephole, she saw Ethan standing in her hallway, his hair still damp from the rain that had started falling again. His expensive suit wrinkled and somehow vulnerable looking. "I know you're there, Sophia," he said quietly, his voice carrying through the heavy wooden door. "Please, just let me explain about the volunteering, about everything. Go away, Ethan." But her voice lacked conviction, and they both knew it. "I can't. Not until you understand that this isn't about your transformation, about how you look now. It's about who you've always been, the woman I was too blind to appreciate." Sophia pressed her forehead against the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could hear the desperation in his voice, the raw honesty that had been missing during their marriage. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to show up and say pretty words and expect me to forgive you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to prove I've changed. People don't change, Ethan. Not really. But even as she said it, she thought about the man who'd spent a month volunteering at the community center, helping elderly people learn to read with infinite patience. That wasn't the Ethan she'd been married to. That man had barely had patience for her, let alone strangers. Then let me prove you wrong. The simple words hung in the air between them, and Sophia felt her resolve cracking like ice in spring. She thought about all the nights she'd dreamed of this moment, him coming to her door, fighting for her, refusing to give up. But in her dreams, she'd been strong enough to turn him away. Now, faced with the reality of his presence, she found her anger warring with something much more dangerous: hope. Against her better judgment, she unlocked the door and opened it just enough to see his face. He looked terribly exhausted, desperate. His usually perfect appearance disheveled in a way that made him seem more human somehow. There were dark circles under his eyes, and she could see he'd been running his hands through his hair, a nervous habit she remembered from their early dating days. Her breath caught at the sight of him. Even rumpled and obviously sleepless, he was still the most handsome man she'd ever known. The same strong jawline, the same brown eyes that had once looked at her like she was his entire world. But there was something different now, a vulnerability, an openness that hadn't been there before. 5 minutes, she said, stepping back to let him in. Then you leave. Ethan stepped into her apartment, his eyes taking in everything. The cozy furniture so different from the sterile perfection of his penthouse, the books everywhere, the photos of her with friends and family, the life she'd built without him. She watched him notice details he'd never cared about before: her collection of vintage teacups on a corner shelf, the reading nook by the window where she spent Sunday mornings, the easel in the corner where she'd started painting again. When his gaze landed on the white roses still clutched in her hands, something vulnerable flickered across his face. You kept them, he said softly. I haven't decided whether to throw them away yet. Sophia set the bouquet on her coffee table with more force than necessary, but she couldn't help breathing in their sweet fragrance. You said you wanted to explain. So explain. Why the fake name? Why the volunteering? Is this all just another game to you? No. Ethan moved closer, and Sophia caught that familiar scent of his cologne mixed with rain and something else. Uncertainty, fear, the smell of a man who'd been carrying the weight of regret for too long. It started as a way to be near you. I won't lie about that. But it became something more. Those people, what you do for them, it made me realize who you really are, who you've always been. And who is that? Sophia crossed her arms, trying to maintain some distance, even as every cell in her body was aware of his proximity. She could feel the heat radiating from him, could see the way his chest rose and fell with each breath. Someone who sees the best in people. Someone who believes everyone deserves a chance to grow, to learn, to become better than they were. His voice dropped to a whisper. Someone who gave a shallow, selfish man 2 years of unconditional love, even when he didn't deserve it. Sophia felt tears pricking at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. Don't you dare try to rewrite our history, to make yourself feel better. I'm not rewriting anything. I'm finally seeing it clearly. Ethan took another step closer, and Sophia found herself backing against the wall, trapped by his intensity. I was cruel to you. I criticized everything about you because I was too insecure to admit that you were better than me in every way that mattered. Better than you? Sophia laughed bitterly. I spent 2 years trying to shrink myself to fit into your world. I stopped eating foods I loved, stopped seeing friends you thought were beneath us, stopped being myself, because I thought if I could just be perfect enough, you'd love me the way I loved you. I did love you. The words came out raw, desperate. I loved you so much it terrified me. You were real, in a way nobody else in my life had ever been. You didn't care about my money or my status. You just wanted me. And I didn't know how to handle that kind of genuine affection. So you tried to change me instead. Sophia's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of years of pain. I tried to make you fit into my shallow world, because I was too much of a coward to admit that your world was better, that kindness mattered more than status, that helping people mattered more than impressing them. Ethan's hands came up to rest on the wall on either side of her head, not quite touching her, but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. I was an idiot. Sophia. A blind, selfish idiot who threw away the best thing that ever happened to him. Sophia stared up at him, searching his face for any sign of deception. any hint that this was just another manipulation. But all she saw was raw honesty, the kind of vulnerability she'd begged for during their marriage and never received. His eyes were bright with unshed tears, and she could see the pulse beating rapidly at his throat. "Why now?" she whispered, her resolve weakening with every word he spoke. "Why are you saying all this now?" "Because seeing you at that gala, seeing what you've become, it made me realize what I lost. Not just how you look, though you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, but watching you with your students, seeing how they light up when you walk into a room, understanding that you've built this amazing life helping people, it made me realize I had a goddess and treated her like she was ordinary. I was never ordinary." The words came out stronger than Sophia had intended, and she saw surprise flicker in Ethan's eyes. This was the woman she'd become, someone who knew her worth, who wouldn't accept less than she deserved. "No," he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "You were extraordinary. You are extraordinary, and I was too stupid and too shallow to see it." They stared at each other in the charged silence of her apartment, years of hurt and longing crackling between them. Sophia could feel herself wavering, could feel the walls she'd built so carefully starting to crumble under the weight of his sincerity and the intensity of his presence. He was so close she could count his eyelashes, could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes that she'd once loved to stare into. "This doesn't change anything," she said, but her voice shook with uncertainty. "It changes everything," Ethan replied, leaning closer until his forehead almost touched hers. "Because now I know what I lost, and I know what I want to fight for." "And what's that?" "You. Us. A chance to love you the way you deserve to be loved from the beginning." Sophia's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she felt herself leaning toward him, drawn by the pull that had always existed between them. She could kiss him right now, could lose herself in the familiar comfort of his arms, could pretend that love was enough to heal all the wounds between them. But then reality crashed back in, and she ducked under his arm, putting distance between them before she did something she'd regret. Her apartment suddenly felt too small, too intimate, with him filling up all the space with his presence and his promises. "Time's up," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You need to leave." Ethan straightened slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. She could see the disappointment there, but also something that looked like determination. "This isn't over, Sophia." "Yes, it is." But even as she said it, Sophia knew she was lying to both of them. As he walked to the door, Ethan paused and looked back at her one more time. "I meant what I said about the roses. They do look like hope, and I'm not giving up on us." After he left, Sophia sank onto her couch and buried her face in the white roses, breathing in their sweet fragrance. Despite everything, despite all the pain and all the walls she'd built, Ethan Caldwell was still the only man who could make her heart race with just a look. And that terrified her more than anything else, because for the first time since their divorce, she was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, he really had changed. And if he had changed, if this vulnerability and devotion were real, then what did that mean for the life she'd so carefully constructed without him? The roses seemed to whisper promises of possibility, of second chances and new beginnings. But Sophia had learned the hard way that some promises were too dangerous to believe. Still, as she sat there surrounded by the sweet scent of hope, she couldn't quite bring herself to throw them away. Chapter 7. The facade crumbles. Javier Morales sat across from Sophia in their favorite coffee shop in the village, stirring his latte with deliberate precision while studying her face with the keen eye of an artist who'd learned to read people's emotions like brushstrokes on canvas. They'd been friends since art school, and he could see through her carefully constructed composure better than anyone. The cafe was nearly empty at this hour, just after 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Wednesday, when most people were locked away in offices. Sophia had insisted on meeting during the day, claiming she couldn't handle another evening of Javier's probing questions about her emotional state. But sitting here now, watching her fidget with her coffee cup and avoid his gaze, he knew she was falling apart. "Mi amor, you look like hell," he said bluntly, his Spanish accent making the observation somehow more gentle than it would have been in plain English. "And don't try to tell me it's just work stress, because I know that look. That's the look of a woman whose heart is at war with her head." Sophia wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, seeking warmth that had nothing to do with the December chill outside. 2 weeks had passed since Ethan's late-night visit to her apartment, 2 weeks since he'd looked at her with such raw honesty and made her question everything she thought she knew about their relationship. She'd replayed that conversation 100 times, analyzing every word, every gesture, every moment when she'd felt her resolve wavering. "I'm fine, Javier, just tired." She took a sip of her cappuccino, but it tasted like ashes in her mouth. Everything tasted wrong lately, felt wrong, as if her entire world had been tilted off its axis. "Mentirosa," he said with a fond smile. "Liar. You forget I've seen you at your worst. Remember those first months after your divorce when you couldn't even get out of bed? This is different. This is you trying to convince yourself of something your heart doesn't believe." Sophia stared out the window at the people hurrying past on the sidewalk, bundled in winter coats and scarves, everyone rushing towards something or away from something else. She envied them their certainty, their sense of direction. Her own life felt like a ship without a compass, spinning in circles while she pretended to know where she was going. "He says he's changed," she whispered, so quietly Javier had to lean forward to hear her. "And you believe him?" "I don't know what I believe anymore." Sophia's voice cracked slightly, and she could feel tears threatening. She'd been on the verge of crying for days, her emotions so close to the surface that even commercials on television could set her off. "The man who volunteered at the community center for a month just to be near me, that's not the same man I was married to. That man had patience with elderly people struggling to read. He remembered that I like white roses. He looked at me like I was precious to him, like I mattered." The words came out in a rush, and Sophia immediately regretted them. Saying it aloud made it real, made her hope real. And hope was the most dangerous thing she could allow herself to feel. Javier reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His fingers were paint-stained from his morning session in the studio, and she could smell the familiar scent of turpentine and creativity that always surrounded him. "Sophia, corazón, I've been watching this telenovela play out for months now. You asked me to help you make him jealous, to torture him a little, and I was happy to do it because that cabron hurt you so badly. But this game we've been playing, it's hurting you too." Sophia looked up at him, seeing the genuine concern in his dark eyes. Javier was her dearest friend, the one person who'd stood by her through the darkest period of her life. He'd held her while she cried, helped her rebuild her confidence, encouraged her transformation not for revenge, but for her own healing. If anyone had the right to an opinion about her love life, it was him. But there was something else in his expression, something she'd been too wrapped up in her own drama to notice before. A sadness, a resignation that made her stomach clench with guilt. "I can see it in your face every time his name comes up," Javier continued, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "You light up. Even when you're trying to look angry. And honey, after what I witnessed at that gallery opening, watching him look at you like you hung the moon, that man is completely destroyed over you." "Good," Sophia said automatically. But the word felt hollow, like a lie she'd told so many times she'd almost convinced herself it was true. "Is it? Is it really good to watch someone you once loved suffer?" Javier's voice was gentle but challenging. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like his suffering is causing you pain, too." Before Sophia could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. Without thinking, she glanced at the screen and felt her heart skip a beat when she saw Ethan's name. The message was simple. "Check your email when you get a chance." No pressure, just something I thought you'd want to see. Javier watched her face change as she read the message, noting the way her breathing quickened, the way her free hand unconsciously went to her throat. "That's him, isn't it? He wants me to check my email." Sophia stared at the phone like it might explode. "I shouldn't. I should just delete it. But you're going to look anyway. I hate that you know me so well." Sophia pulled out her laptop with trembling fingers and logged into her email account. Ethan's message was at the top of her inbox, the subject line reading simply, "Thank you." She opened it with Javier reading over her shoulder, both of them curious despite themselves. "Sophia, I wanted you to know that because of the time I spent volunteering at the community center, I've decided to establish a literacy foundation. Not in my name. I don't want credit or recognition, but watching you work with those students, seeing how much it meant to them to have someone believe in their potential, it changed something in me. I've enclosed the legal documents showing the establishment of the Sophia Hart Literacy Foundation. It will provide free tutoring, books, and resources to underprivileged adults throughout the city. The initial funding is $2 million, with a commitment to contribute the same amount annually. I know you'll probably think this is another manipulation, another way to try to win you back. Maybe it started that way, but sitting in that community center, watching George's face light up when he read his first complete Bible verse, watching Carmen help her daughter with homework. For the first time, that was real. That mattered in a way none of my business success ever has. You were right when you said I didn't see you. But I see you now, Sophia. I see your heart, your compassion, your strength. I see the woman who stayed late to help struggling students, who celebrated every small victory like it was a miracle, who made people feel valuable and worthy of love. I can never undo the hurt I caused you. But maybe I can honor the woman you are by trying to become someone worthy of having known you. The foundation is yours to do with as you please. Accept it, reject it, burn the papers, it doesn't matter. What matters is that your work continues, that more people get the chance to experience the gift you gave me. The belief that everyone deserves compassion, patience, and hope. All my love, Ethan. Sophia stared at the screen in stunned silence, tears streaming down her cheeks without her realizing it. The legal documents were all there. Articles of incorporation, tax-exempt status, bank account information. $2 million, no strings attached, dedicated to literacy programs in her name. Dios mío, Javier whispered. He actually did it. He established a foundation in your honor. It's too much, Sophia said, her voice shaking. It's too much, too grand. Too real, Javier suggested gently. Corazon, this isn't about winning you back with money. This is about a man who saw what you do, what you care about, and decided to dedicate his resources to making it bigger than you could do alone. Sophia closed the laptop with trembling hands, her mind reeling. $2 million, not spent on jewelry or expensive gifts designed to dazzle her, but invested in the work she cared about most. It was the kind of gesture that spoke to someone who truly understood her heart. I don't know how to process this, she admitted. Then don't. Not yet. Javier signaled the waitress for another round of coffee, giving Sophia time to collect herself. But can I ask you something? And I want you to be honest with me, and with yourself. Sophia nodded, not trusting her voice. Do you still love him? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Sophia opened her mouth to deny it, to claim that what she felt was just residual emotion, confusion, the pull of shared history. But sitting there in their favorite coffee shop with her dearest friend, she couldn't lie anymore. Yes, she whispered. God help me, yes. I never stopped loving him. Even when I hated him, even when I was trying to make him suffer, part of me was hoping he'd fight for me, prove that I was worth the effort. And hasn't he? This foundation, the volunteering, the way he looks at you, isn't this him fighting for you? Sophia thought about Ethan's face during their last confrontation, the raw honesty in his voice when he'd admitted his mistakes. She thought about him spending a month helping elderly people learn to read, not for recognition or tax benefits, but because it was work that mattered to her. She thought about the white roses, the small gesture that showed he'd finally learned to see her clearly. I'm scared, she admitted. I'm terrified that if I let him back in, he'll hurt me again. That this is all just an elaborate performance. And once he has me, he'll go back to being the man who criticized everything about me. Javier was quiet for a long moment, considering his words carefully. Can I tell you something? Something I've been thinking about for weeks? Sophia nodded, sensing the shift in his tone. That night at the gallery opening, when we were playing our little charade, I had a conversation with your ex-husband afterwards. Sophia's head snapped up. What? You never told me that? Because I wasn't sure it would help, but maybe I should have mentioned it sooner. Javier's smile was rueful. He approached me later that evening, asked me point blank about our relationship. I could see he was barely holding it together. This powerful man reduced to desperate jealousy over a woman who wouldn't even acknowledge him. What did you tell him? The truth. That I'm gay, that we're best friends, that I was helping you make him jealous? Javier shrugged at Sophia's shocked expression. What? I'm a terrible liar when it comes to matters of the heart. Besides, I felt sorry for the poor bastard. Sophia stared at him in disbelief. You told him our whole plan was fake? I told him I was gay, and that you were using me to make him jealous. He figured out the rest himself. Javier reached for her hands, his expression serious. Sophia, I've never seen a man look more relieved in my entire life. Not because the competition was gone, but because it meant you still cared enough to play games with his emotions. He's known this whole time, for weeks now. And yet, he hasn't used that information to corner you or call you out on the deception. He's just been waiting, giving you space to figure out what you really want. Javier paused, studying her face with the intensity he usually reserved for his paintings. You know what I think? I think he's been waiting for you to stop punishing him and start punishing yourself. What do you mean? I mean, you've been so focused on making him suffer that you haven't noticed you're suffering too. You've been denying yourself the thing you want, this love, because you're afraid of being vulnerable again. Sophia felt something crack open in her chest, a pain so sharp it took her breath away. What if I'm not strong enough to survive losing him again? What if you're not strong enough to survive not taking this chance? Javier countered. You've spent 3 years building walls around your heart, becoming this goddess of a woman who can bring any man to his knees. But what's the point of all that strength if you never use it to reach for what you really want? They sat in silence for several minutes, Sophia's mind racing as she processed everything Javier had said. Around them, the coffee shop continued its afternoon rhythm. The hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of conversation, the clink of cups against saucers, normal sounds of normal life, while Sophia's world shifted beneath her feet. That's possible, Javier said honestly, when she finally voiced her fears about Ethan hurting her again. People can lie, can pretend to change. But Sophia, in all the years I've known you, I've never seen anyone look at you the way that man does. Not even when you were married to him. He looks at you now like you're a miracle. He can't quite believe is real. Sophia stared at her reflection in the coffee shop window, seeing the woman she'd become. Confident, successful, beautiful. But underneath all of that, she was still the woman who'd loved Ethan Caldwell with her whole heart, who'd believed in the possibility of forever until he'd crushed that belief with his shallow expectations. I don't know if I can trust him, she said finally. Then don't trust him, Javier replied. Trust yourself. Trust the woman you've become, the strength you've built. You're not the same person who let him walk all over you. You're not going to disappear into his world again because now you know your own worth. As they sat in comfortable silence, Sophia's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from her sister Layla. Girl, you need to see the news. Check channel set. Curious, Sophia pulled up the news app on her phone and found the story immediately. The headline read, Tech Millionaire Establishes Anonymous Literacy Foundation. The article detailed how Ethan Caldwell had quietly donated $2 million to establish a foundation dedicated to adult literacy programs, but had specifically requested that his name not be associated with the organization publicly. He's not taking credit, Sophia whispered, showing Javier the article. He could have used this for publicity, for tax benefits, for making himself look good, but he's staying anonymous. Javier smiled softly. Because it's not about him, mi amor. It's about you, about honoring what you do without trying to overshadow it. Sophia felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of the tight knot of anger and fear she'd been carrying for so long. Maybe Javier was right. Maybe it was time to stop punishing herself for wanting something she'd never stopped loving. There's something else, Javier said gently. Something I should have told you weeks ago. What? The night he found out about us, about the fake relationship, he didn't get angry. He didn't demand to know why you were playing games or accuse you of being cruel. Javier's voice was soft with something that sounded almost like admiration. He just asked me to take care of you, to make sure you were happy, even if it wasn't with him. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. He said that? He said you deserve to be loved by someone who sees your worth. If that can't be me, then I'm glad it's someone who clearly adores you. Javier shook his head. That's not the same man who hurt you, Sophia. That's a man who's learned to put your happiness above his own. For the first time in months, Sophia felt the walls around her heart begin to crack, not from pain this time, but from hope. Maybe, just maybe, Ethan Caldwell really had changed. Maybe the man she'd glimpsed in that community center, patient and kind and genuinely moved by other people's struggles, was who he'd become. The question was, did she have the courage to find out? As she looked across the table at Javier, her dearest friend who'd held her together through the worst period of her life. She realized that maybe it was time to find out if he could hold her together through the scariest leap of faith she'd ever considered taking. Chapter 8. Walls Come Down. The call came at 3 o'clock in the morning, jarring Sophia from restless sleep filled with dreams of white roses and familiar brown eyes. Her sister Layla's voice was tight with panic, cutting through the fog of sleep like a knife. "Soph, you need to get to Brooklyn Methodist Hospital right now." "It's Grandma Lily." Sophia's blood turned to ice. "What happened?" "Stroke. Mrs. Thompson found her collapsed in her apartment this evening. The paramedics think it happened sometime around dinner, but she was alone for hours before anyone found her." Lila's voice cracked. "Soph, it's bad. Really bad." Within 20 minutes, Sophia was speeding through the empty streets of Brooklyn in her Honda, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Lily Hart had been more than a grandmother to her. She'd been a refuge during the darkest days of her childhood. The woman who taught her that love was patient and kind, that true beauty came from within. The thought of losing her now, when Sophia's own life was in such turmoil, felt unbearable. Brooklyn Methodist Hospital at 3:30 in the morning was a study in fluorescent-lit desperation. Sophia found Layla in the ICU waiting room, pacing like a caged animal, her usually perfect makeup streaked with tears. "How is she?" Sophia demanded, pulling her sister into a fierce hug. "Unconscious. They don't know if she's going to wake up." Layla's voice was muffled against Sophia's shoulder. "The doctor said something about brain swelling, about waiting to see how much damage was done. I don't understand half of what they're telling me." Sophia felt her world tilt sideways. Grandma Lily had been her anchor through every storm. Her parents' messy divorce, her struggles in school, the devastating end of her marriage to Ethan. The idea of a world without Lily's gentle wisdom and unconditional love was unthinkable. "Can we see her?" "For a few minutes every hour." "She looks so small, Soph, so fragile." They sat together in the uncomfortable plastic chairs, holding hands like they had as children, waiting for dawn and better news that might not come. Sophia tried to pray, but the words felt inadequate. Her grandmother had always been the strong one, the constant in their chaotic family. How could someone so vital, so full of life, be reduced to machines and monitors? At 6 o'clock, a.m. Dr. Emily Wong appeared, one of the city's most renowned neurologists. After introducing herself to Sophia and Layla, she explained the situation. "I've been contacted about Mrs. Hart's case," Dr. Wong said gently. "A mutual acquaintance expressed concern about ensuring she receives the best possible care. I'd like to discuss transferring her to Mount Sinai, where we have more advanced equipment for stroke rehabilitation." "Transfer to Mount Sinai?" Layla looked confused. "But the expense has been covered." Mr. Caldwell insisted on handling all medical costs. Dr. Wong's expression was professional, but kind. Sometimes people want to help when they can make a real difference. Sophia felt something cold settle in her stomach. Anonymous benefactor, someone who heard about your grandmother's case through the hospital network and wanted to help. It happens more often than you'd think. People who want to give back but prefer to do so quietly. But Sophia knew better. She knew exactly who would have the resources and the connections to arrange for top-tier medical care, who would know that she was here, grieving and frightened, and want to help without expecting credit or recognition. Ethan. After Dr. Wong explained the transfer process and treatment options, Sophia's mind raced. How had he known? How had he found out about her grandmother's stroke so quickly? And how had he managed to arrange for specialized care in the middle of the night? The answer came when she stepped outside for air and spotted a familiar figure sitting on a bench in the hospital's small garden area. Ethan looked like he hadn't slept, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled. He was just sitting there in the pre-dawn darkness, as if he were keeping vigil. "You," Sophia said, her voice carrying across the empty garden. Ethan looked up, and she saw exhaustion and concern etched in every line of his face. "How is she? Don't pretend you don't know. Don't pretend you haven't been pulling strings and making calls all night." Sophia walked toward him, her anger warring with something else, something that felt dangerously like gratitude. "Dr. Wong, Mount Sinai. The anonymous benefactor, that's all you, isn't it? Ethan stood slowly, and Sophia could see he was choosing his words carefully. Your grandmother is important to you. That makes her important to me. How did you even know she was here? I have a contact at the hospital. When your name appeared on a visitor log at 3 o'clock in the morning, they called me. Ethan took a step closer, and Sophia didn't back away. I know what Lily means to you, Sophia. I remember how you used to light up when you talked about her, how you'd call her every Sunday without fail. Sophia felt tears burning behind her eyes. During their marriage, those Sunday calls to Grandma Lily were sacred to her, one of the few things Ethan had never criticized or tried to change. Lily had been the one person who'd seen through his polished exterior from the beginning, who'd warned Sophia gently that he didn't seem to appreciate what he had. She never liked you, Sophia said quietly. I know. She was right not to. Ethan's smile was sad and self-aware. She saw what I was doing to you long before I did. Smart woman. She is smart. She's going to be fine. Sophia's voice broke on the words, betraying the fear she'd been trying so hard to contain. She will be, Ethan said with quiet conviction. Dr. Wong is the best in the city. If anyone can help her recover, it's Emily. You know her personally. We've worked together on other cases. Emily doesn't just take consultations for money, Sophia. She takes them when she thinks she can make a real difference. Ethan moved closer, and this time Sophia didn't retreat. Your grandmother is going to get the best care possible, and it has nothing to do with me trying to win points with you. It's because she raised the woman I love, and I owe her everything for that. The simple declaration hung in the cold morning air between them. Sophia stared up at Ethan's face, seeing nothing but sincerity and bone-deep exhaustion. He'd been here all night, she realized, sitting in this garden, making calls, arranging care for a woman who'd never shown him anything but polite disapproval, simply because she mattered to Sophia. Why? She whispered. Why are you doing this? Because 3 years ago, I lost the most important thing in my life through my own stupidity and cruelty. I can't change that, but I can make sure that you don't lose the most important person in yours if there's anything I can do to prevent it. The tears came then, hot and fast and unstoppable. All the fear and exhaustion and grief she'd been holding back since Layla's call crashed over her like a wave, and Sophia found herself sobbing in the hospital garden as the sun began to rise over Brooklyn. Without hesitation, Ethan pulled her into his arms, and for the first time in 3 years, Sophia didn't resist. She buried her face against his chest and cried for her grandmother, for her broken marriage, for all the years of hurt and longing and stubborn pride. His arms were strong and warm around her, his hands stroking her hair with the gentle patience she remembered from their best moments together. She's all I have left, Sophia sobbed against his shirt. My parents are gone. You're gone. And if I lose her too. You won't lose her, Ethan said fiercely, his voice rough with emotion. And you haven't lost me, Sophia. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. Sophia pulled back enough to look at him, seeing her own tears reflected in his brown eyes. Why are you being so good to me when I've been so cruel to you? Because I love you, he said simply, cupping her face in his hands. I've never stopped loving you, even when I was too stupid to show it right, even when I was trying to fight for you, when you needed me to. For a moment, they just stood there in the hospital garden, looking at each other as the world woke up around them. Sophia could see her own longing reflected in Ethan's eyes, could feel the pull that had always existed between them, drawing her closer despite all her careful defenses. Ethan, she whispered. And his name on her lips sounded like a prayer. I know, he said, his thumb tracing her cheekbone where tears still glistened. I know you're not ready to trust me. I know I have to earn it. But Sophia, I swear to you, I will spend the rest of my life proving that I'm not the man who hurt you, that I'm worthy of the love you gave me. And then, before fear or logic could intervene, Sophia rose on her tiptoes and kissed him not with the desperate passion of their encounter in the rain, but with something deeper, tenderness, gratitude, and the first fragile shoots of hope returning to life. This time, when Javier appeared at the hospital an hour later to offer support, Sophia didn't pull away from Ethan's arms. For the first time since their divorce, she let herself lean on someone else's strength, let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, some things were worth risking her heart for again. Lily Hart opened her eyes that afternoon, groggy but alert, and the first thing she said was, "Sophia, honey, who's that handsome man holding your hand like he never wants to let go?" Sophia looked at Ethan, saw the love and determination in his eyes, and for the first time in years, she smiled with her whole heart. Chapter 9. The Ultimate Test. Sophia Hart stared at her reflection in Javier's full-length mirror, her heart still racing from the conversation they'd just had. 3 weeks had passed since Lily Hart's stroke, 3 weeks since Sophia had let herself fall into Ethan's arms and remember what it felt like to be held by someone who truly loved her. Her grandmother was recovering beautifully at Mount Sinai, her speech therapy progressing faster than anyone had dared hope, and every day brought new evidence of the extraordinary care that Ethan had arranged so quietly, so selflessly. But Sophia found herself more confused than ever. The woman staring back at her from Javier's mirror looked perfect, the kind of perfect she'd spent 3 years crafting. Her reflection showed a stunning figure in a form-fitting black dress, hair styled in loose waves that caught the light, makeup applied with the precision of someone who'd learned to use beauty as both shield and weapon. But behind her carefully constructed exterior, she felt like she was coming apart at the seams. She sat in Javier's art studio on a Friday evening, watching him put the finishing touches on a canvas that swirled with colors she couldn't name, passionate reds bleeding into hopeful golds, dark blues softening into gentle lavenders. His art had always been emotional, but lately his paintings seemed to pulse with a kind of bittersweet longing that made her chest ache. The studio smelled of turpentine and possibility. Canvases lining the walls in various stages of completion. Some showed abstract expressions of joy and pain. Others captured moments of raw human emotion that made Sophia's heart clench with recognition. Javier's art had always been a mirror to his soul, and lately that soul seemed to be reflecting her own inner turmoil. "We need to talk," she said quietly, setting down her wineglass on a paint-splattered table. Javier didn't look up from his painting, but she saw his shoulders tense slightly. He'd been expecting this conversation for weeks, she realized. The way he looked at her lately, with something that seemed almost like pity mixed with love, had become impossible to ignore. "I know, mi amor. I've been waiting for this conversation. You know I know you're in love with him again. Hell, I know you never stopped being in love with him." Javier finally turned to face her, his handsome face gentle but sad. There were paint smudges on his cheek, and his dark hair was tousled from running his hands through it, a habit he developed when he was wrestling with difficult emotions. "And I know this little game we've been playing has run its course." Sophia felt tears prickle her eyes. "I'm sorry, Javier. I never meant for you to get hurt in all this." "Hurt?" Javier laughed, but there was no bitterness in it. Instead, there was something that sounded almost like relief. "Corazón, I'm not hurt. I'm worried about you. This elaborate revenge fantasy you've been living, it's not making you happy. It's making you miserable." "I'm not miserable," Sophia protested weakly. But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. She'd been walking around in a fog of confusion and longing for weeks, jumping every time her phone buzzed, disappointed when it wasn't Ethan's name on the screen. "Aren't you? You've spent the last 3 weeks jumpy as a cat, checking your phone every 5 minutes to see if he's texted, looking disappointed when he hasn't. You light up whenever someone mentions his name, even when you're trying to look annoyed." Javier set down his paintbrush and moved to sit beside her on the worn velvet couch that had seen them through countless conversations over the years. "Honey, you're not getting revenge anymore. You're torturing yourself." Sophia stared down at her hands, knowing he was right. The manicured nails, the expensive rings, the carefully maintained perfection, it all felt like a costume she was wearing for a play that had long since ended. "What if he hurts me again? What if he doesn't?" Javier countered gently. "What if this time he really has changed? What if you're letting fear keep you from the love you've always wanted?" The question hung between them in the paint-scented air, heavy with possibility and terror in equal measure. Sophia thought about the man who'd sat vigil in a hospital garden, who'd arranged for her grandmother's care without seeking credit, who'd established a literacy foundation in her name, simply because he'd seen what mattered to her heart. "I don't know if I'm brave enough to find out." Javier was quiet for a long moment, mixing colors on his palette with steady hands. She watched him work, remembering all the times he'd painted through his own heartbreak, when his ex-boyfriend had cheated, when his parents had disowned him for being gay, When his first gallery showing had been a disaster, art had always been his way of processing emotions too big for words. "Can I tell you something? Something I probably should have told you months ago?" Sophia nodded, sensing the shift in his tone. "That night at the gallery opening, when we were playing our little charade, I had a long conversation with your ex-husband afterwards. Not just the brief exchange I mentioned before, but a real conversation." Sophia's head snapped up. "What?" "You told me you only talked to him for a few minutes. Because I didn't want to interfere with your plans for revenge, but maybe I should have been more honest with you." Javier's smile was rueful, tinged with guilt. "After I told him I was gay and that we were just friends, he didn't get angry or accusatory like I expected. Instead, he broke down, completely fell apart. This powerful, successful man, standing in a bathroom at an art gallery, crying like his world had ended." Javier's voice was soft with memory. "He told me about your marriage, about how he'd treated you, about how he'd been trying to change himself ever since you left. He wasn't making excuses or trying to justify what he'd done. He was just broken." Sophia felt her chest tighten. "What did he say?" "He said watching you with me, thinking I was your boyfriend, was the most painful thing he'd ever experienced. Not because he was jealous of me specifically, but because seeing you happy with someone else made him realize what he'd thrown away." Javier reached for her hands, his own paint-stained fingers gentle against her skin. "But you know what the most heartbreaking part was? He said he hoped you were happy, even if it destroyed him. He said you deserved to be loved by someone who saw your worth from the beginning." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't the Ethan she remembered from their marriage, the man who'd always put his own needs first, who'd never considered her feelings when making decisions that affected them both. "He's known about our fake relationship for weeks now," Javier continued. "And yet, he hasn't used that information to corner you or expose the deception. He's just been waiting, giving you the space to figure out what you really want." "He's been waiting for me to be ready," Sophia whispered, finally understanding. "Exactly. And Corazon, I think he'd wait forever if that's what you needed. But the question is, how long are you going to keep punishing both of you for mistakes he's trying so hard to make up for?" Sophia stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the street below. The evening was crisp and clear. Couples walking hand in hand under the streetlights, everyone else living their lives while she remained frozen in indecision. "What if I'm making a mistake? Then you'll survive it. You're strong enough now to survive anything." Javier joined her at the window, his reflection visible beside hers in the glass. "But Corazon, what if you're not making a mistake? What if this is your second chance at the kind of love most people never find even once?" The words hit her like a physical blow because they echoed the thoughts she'd been trying to suppress for weeks. Every logical part of her said that Ethan would hurt her again, that people didn't really change, that she was setting herself up for another devastating heartbreak. But her heart whispered something different. That the man who'd volunteered anonymously at her community center, who'd established a foundation in her name, who'd sat in a hospital garden all night waiting for news about her grandmother, wasn't the same man who'd asked her to get plastic surgery. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "Good. Being scared means it matters. Being scared means it's real." That night, Sophia sat in her apartment, staring at her phone. Ethan's contact information glowing on the screen. She typed and deleted a dozen messages, none of them capturing what she wanted to say. How did you tell someone that you might be ready to trust them again? How did you admit that 3 years of anger and hurt had really been 3 years of missing them so much it felt like a physical ache? Instead of texting, she found herself getting dressed not in the armor of designer clothes and perfect makeup she'd worn to their previous encounters, but in something simple and honest, in a flowing white dress that made her feel like herself. Her hair loose around her shoulders, minimal makeup that let her natural beauty shine through. She studied herself in the mirror, seeing not the goddess she'd created to torment Ethan, but the woman she'd always been underneath. Someone who believed in love, who hoped for the best in people, who was brave enough to take risks for the things that mattered most. The drive to Manhattan felt eternal, every red light giving her another opportunity to turn around and go home. But something stronger than fear propelled her forward, not just love, but the recognition that she'd been living half a life for 3 years, defined more by what she was running from than what she was running toward. It was past midnight when she stood outside Ethan's building, her heart hammering against her ribs as she gave her name to the doorman. The lobby was all marble and crystal, intimidatingly expensive. But she felt different walking through it, this time like an intruder or a supplicant. But like a woman who knew her own worth and had chosen to be here. He must have called up, because when the elevator doors opened on the penthouse floor, Ethan was waiting for her in the hallway. He looked like he'd been sleeping, his hair mussed, wearing dark pajama pants and a white t-shirt that clung to his chest. But his eyes were instantly alert when he saw her, and Sophia caught her breath at the raw hope and vulnerability in his expression. She'd forgotten how beautiful he was in unguarded moments like this, when his carefully maintained facade fell away, and she could see the man underneath. The same strong shoulders she'd once loved to rest her head against. The same hands that had once known every inch of her body. The same mouth that had whispered promises in the dark. "Sophia," he said, her name barely a whisper. "I know Javier told you," she said, without preamble, her voice steadier than she felt. "I know you've known our whole relationship was fake." Ethan nodded slowly, not taking his eyes off her face. "I figured it out after he told me he was gay. The question is, why are you here?" Sophia moved closer, drawn by the magnetic pull that had always existed between them. In the soft lighting of his hallway, wearing simple clothes with his guard completely down, Ethan looked more beautiful to her than he ever had in his expensive suits and polished perfection. This was the man she'd fallen in love with. Vulnerable, human, real. "I've been playing games with you," she said quietly. "Cruel games designed to make you suffer the way you made me suffer. I know." His voice was rough with emotion. "I deserved it." "Did you? Did you really deserve months of emotional torture because you were too shallow to appreciate what you had?" Ethan's eyes searched her face, as if he were trying to read her intentions in the curve of her lips, the set of her shoulders. "What are you asking me, Sophia? I'm asking if you think you've suffered enough. If you think we've both paid the price for the mistakes we made." Sophia stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body, to see the pulse beating at his throat. "I'm asking if you're ready to stop playing games and figure out if we can build something real together." "I've been ready for that since the moment I saw you at the gala," Ethan said, his hands trembling as he reached up to cup her face. "I've been waiting for you to be ready." "I'm scared," Sophia admitted, leaning into his touch despite herself. "I'm terrified that you'll break my heart again." "Then don't give it to me all at once," Ethan said, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones with reverent gentleness. "Let me earn it back, piece by piece. Let me prove that I'm not the man who hurt you." They stood there in his hallway, foreheads touching, breathing the same air, balanced on the knife's edge between past and future. Sophia could feel herself wavering, could feel the walls around her heart crumbling under the weight of his sincerity and her own desperate longing. She thought about Javier's words, about being brave enough to reach for what she wanted. She thought about her grandmother recovering in the hospital because of Ethan's quiet intervention. She thought about the Literacy Foundation, about all the people who would be helped because he'd seen what mattered to her heart. But she wasn't ready to surrender yet, not completely. If Ethan really had changed, if this devotion and patience were real, then he would understand what she needed from him. "Chase me," Ethan Caldwell. She whispered, then stepped back from his touch before she could lose her nerve. "If you want me back, you're going to have to pursue me. Court me. Show me every day that I'm worth the effort." Ethan's eyes blazed with something that looked like joy, mixed with determination. She could see him understanding the challenge, accepting it, embracing it even. This wasn't a rejection. It was an invitation to prove himself. "For how long?" he asked, his voice steady despite the intensity burning in his eyes. Sophia smiled, the expression holding all the challenge and promise in the world. She felt powerful in that moment, not because she was denying herself to him, but because she was finally taking control of her own story. "Until I believe you'll never give up on us again." And then she walked away, leaving him standing in his doorway with his heart in his eyes and hope burning bright in his chest. The games were over, but the real work was just beginning. And for the first time in 3 years, Sophia felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, not running from love, but running toward it at her own pace, on her own terms. As the elevator doors closed behind her, she caught one last glimpse of Ethan's face. And what she saw there made her heart soar. He looked like a man who'd just been given a second chance at everything that mattered, and who would spend every day of his life proving he deserved it. Chapter 10. New Beginning. The first letter arrived the morning after Sophia's midnight visit, slipped under her apartment door while she slept. Her name was written across the envelope in Ethan's distinctive handwriting, and inside was a single page covered in his careful script. My dearest Sophia, day 1 of proving myself worthy of your love. I woke up this morning with your words echoing in my heart. Chase me. I accept the challenge, not because I see it as a game to be won, but because you are worth every effort, every gesture, every day of devotion I can give you. I love you. I love your strength, your compassion, your brilliant mind. I love the way you light up when you talk about your students, the way you hum unconsciously when you're happy, the way you bite your lower lip when you're thinking hard about something important. I love who you've become, but I also love who you've always been, the woman I was too blind and selfish to appreciate when I had the privilege of calling you mine. Forever yours, Ethan. P.S. Check your front step. Sophia opened her door to find a single white rose lying on her doormat. No elaborate arrangement or expensive vase, just one perfect bloom wrapped in simple brown paper. It was the first of many. Every morning for the next month brought a new letter and a single white rose. Ethan's letters chronicled his days, his thoughts, his growing understanding of what real love meant. He wrote about the books he was reading, poetry and literature he'd never bothered with before trying to understand the world through her eyes. He wrote about volunteering at other literacy centers throughout the city, how teaching adults to read had become a passion rather than just a way to impress her. He wrote about his therapy sessions, his efforts to understand the shallow, insecure man he'd been and become someone worthy of a second chance. He wrote about his dreams, not business ambitions or financial goals, but dreams of quiet Sunday mornings with her, of growing old together, of building a life based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. Sophia found herself looking forward to these letters more than she wanted to admit. They revealed a depth to Ethan she'd never known existed, a vulnerability he'd never shown during their marriage. This wasn't the polished, successful businessman trying to win her back with grand gestures. This was a man laying his soul bare, offering her his authentic self without pretense or protection. The roses found their way into every room of her apartment. She couldn't bring herself to throw them away, and soon her home looked like a garden of hope and possibility. 3 weeks into Ethan's campaign, Sophia was leaving the community center after a particularly long evening teaching session when she spotted him across the street. He was sitting on a bench, not watching her or trying to approach, just there, present. When their eyes met, he lifted his hand in a small wave, and she felt her heart flutter in response. The next day, he was there again. And the next, always respectful, never invasive, but constant as sunrise. A reminder that he wasn't giving up, that she was worth waiting for. He's been there every day this week, her colleague Carmen mentioned, gesturing toward the window where Ethan sat reading a book in the afternoon sunshine. That's either incredibly romantic or slightly concerning, and I'm leaning toward romantic. Sophia looked out at him, noting the casual clothes so different from his usual expensive suits, the relaxed way he sat absorbed in what appeared to be a book of poetry. He's not stalking me. He's courting me. And how do you feel about being pursued? Sophia considered the question seriously. During their marriage, Ethan had never pursued her. He'd assumed her love was a given, something he could take for granted while he focused on other priorities. This daily presence, these letters and roses, this patient devotion, it was everything she'd dreamed of during their darkest moments together. I feel cherished, she admitted. That evening, Sophia did something she hadn't done in weeks. She called Ethan. His phone barely rang once before he answered, breathless, as if he'd been waiting for her call his entire life. Sophia, he said simply. Thank you, she said, for the letters, the roses, for sitting outside my work every day like some lovesick teenager. It's working, by the way. I'm starting to believe you might actually mean it this time. I mean every word, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Every letter, every rose, every day I sit on that bench hoping you'll look out the window and smile. It's all real, Sophia. This is me fighting for us. I know, she whispered. I'm starting to know. The breakthrough came 6 weeks after her midnight challenge, at the Brooklyn Community Center's annual fundraising gala. an event Sophia had been planning for months. She'd thrown herself into the work, determined to make it a success despite her emotional turmoil. The evening was everything she'd hoped for, and more. The center's main hall had been transformed with twinkling lights and flowing fabric. Books incorporated into the decorations as if knowledge itself was being celebrated. Local authors read excerpts from their work. Literacy students shared their success stories. And the community came together to support something that truly mattered. Sophia moved through the crowd in a stunning midnight blue gown, accepting congratulations on the event's success, but part of her attention was always scanning the room. She hadn't invited Ethan, but she knew he'd purchased a table, one of the largest sponsorships of the evening. That the Sophia Hart Literacy Foundation had contributed significantly to the fundraiser's success, though his name appeared nowhere in the program. She found him standing alone on the center's small balcony, looking out over the Brooklyn Bridge as it sparkled in the distance. He wore a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, but somehow he looked different, more relaxed, more genuine than she'd ever seen him at formal events. "Hiding from the party?" she asked, stepping out onto the balcony beside him. Ethan turned, and when he saw her, his breath caught audibly. "You look absolutely breathtaking," he said simply, without the practiced charm she remembered from their marriage. "But then, you always do." "Thank you for the sponsorships," she said. "The foundation's contribution made this evening possible." "The foundation is yours, Sophia. You don't need to thank me for what's already yours." Ethan moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with the cool night air. "How are you feeling about tonight?" "About everything?" Sophia looked out over the city they both loved, the bridges and lights and endless possibilities stretching before them. "I feel like myself again," she said honestly. "For the first time in years, I feel like I know who I am and what I want to." "And what do you want to?" Sophia turned to face him fully, seeing all the love and hope and patient devotion in his brown eyes. This man had spent 2 months proving his worth to her, not with expensive gifts or grand gestures, but with consistency, honesty, and the kind of quiet determination that spoke to something deep in her soul. "I want to dance," she said, extending her hand to him. Ethan took her hand with the reverence of a man receiving a sacred gift and led her back into the gala, where soft music was playing for the few couples who'd chosen to dance rather than mingle. But instead of joining them on the makeshift dance floor, he led her to a quiet corner where they could move together without an audience. As they swayed to the gentle music, Sophia felt something finally settle into place in her chest. This was what love was supposed to feel like. Not the desperate need to change someone or be changed by them, but to the simple joy of being seen, understood, and cherished exactly as you are. "I have something to ask you," Ethan said softly, his voice barely audible over the music. "I know," Sophia replied, because she could see it in his eyes, could feel it in the way he held her, like something precious and irreplaceable. "Will you marry me again?" he asked, producing a simple, elegant ring from his pocket, not the massive diamond he'd given her the first time, but something classic and timeless that spoke of partnership rather than possession. "Not the people we were before, but to the people we've become. Will you build a life with me based on who we really are, not who we think we should be?" Sophia looked down at the ring, then up into the face of the man who'd broken her heart and spent 2 months putting it back together again. She saw his sincerity, his growth, his absolute devotion to becoming worthy of her love. "Yes," she whispered, and watched joy transform his features like sunrise. "Yes, Ethan, I'll marry you again." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Sophia felt the last of her walls crumble completely. They kissed there on the edge of the dance floor, surrounded by books and learning and hope for the future. And for the first time in years, Sophia knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The second time around, love felt like coming home,